I'm Doug Likes. Well, Santa was extra good to me this year at Christmas. I got a new DeWalt contractor's table saw. It was everything I wanted, and I love it. But there was just one problem. It didn't come with a stand. Well, shoot, that's not a problem. I got a new saw. I'll just build one myself, I thought. And so that's what I did. It turned out great, and it was so much fun to build. Let me show you how I did it. I'm a do-it-yourselfer. A few years ago, I replaced the doors on our garden shed. About 10 years ago, I finished our basement. Now that was a job. Last winter, though, I built a footbench for the end of our bed. Considering my limited tool inventory, it's a wonder I finished the task. I realized then that my projects would go much more smoothly if only I had a table saw. Then in early December, I found a DeWalt 7480 contractor saw on sale at Farm and Fleet, a local farm and home store. The saw was priced at $300, which was truly a great deal. I even checked the internet. No other retailer came close. Fortunately, my wife took notice and bought the saw for me for Christmas. About that time, the carpentry crew showed up to install our new decks, actually. They replaced both the big back deck and the smaller side deck too. We had a couple of weeks of moderate December temperatures, and they took advantage of the good weather. In tearing out the old decks, they threw away a lot of reasonably good lumber. I couldn't resist dumpster diving and salvaging a couple tuba tins. They also left behind some nice, new, treated scraps, tuba 12s, tuba 10s, etc. I scooped some of them up too. When I decided to build a stand, I tapped this reserve of wood to put it to good use and save some money. I know, the wood is treated, but I figured with a coat of paint it wouldn't warp, twist, or endanger the interior air quality. At least not much. The first job was to sketch up plans. I took drafting in high school, but that was a long time ago. So, using my best chicken scratches, I came up with a reasonable set of drawings. The overall height would be 21.5 inches, the width 30 inches, and the depth 24. I planned to install 3 drawers made from 1/2 inch plywood. The cabinet base would be enclosed using 1/4 inch plywood. Then I planned to paint the stand with 2 colors, black and yellow, same as the saw. Next up, cut the lumber to size. This was New Year's weekend and it was cold outside. The high that weekend was 9 above and the low 13 below. However, I didn't want to get a bunch of dust floating around my basement shop, especially since the furnace was doing double time. I could just see all that dust making its way into the adjoining furnace room and being blown all over our house. I'd have been in the doghouse for sure. So cold or not, I set up shop outside. Brr! Since I didn't have a stand, I set the new saw up on sawhorses and an old piece of countertop. I used C-clamps to hold the counter in place. Fortunately, the saw didn't scoot around much. After cutting the boards to length, I cut 1/4 inch dados along 1 or 2 sides depending on placement. Then it was time to reclaim one of the old tuba 10 floor joists. I cross-cut it into a manageable size, ripped it to 8 inches wide, and joined the boards together using a homemade dowel jig. Next, I set to work removing the old finish. I even became reacquainted with an old friend, my block plane. It had been so long since I'd used it, I'd forgotten how to adjust and sharpen the blade. Surprisingly, that old board was starting to shape up. Using my circular saw and a crosscut jig, I cut the finished board to size. I then finished it off with a 45-degree chamfer bit and another old buddy, my 1980s era Black & Decker router. This old guy was a hand-me-down from my brother-in-law years ago. I don't use it very often, but when I do, it runs like a champ. Noisy as heck, though. I decided to join the frame using pocket holes. My daughter and son-in-law gave me a Kreg jig a few years ago. I've only used it a couple times, so it was good to give it a workout. I have 2 Kreg clamps as well. The newest, a right angle clamp that was a birthday gift from my dad, really helped. The joints turned out nice and snug. I slapped the frame together, inserting 1/4-inch plywood in the dado grooves. Using Valspar paint from Lowe's, I painted the panels Morning Sunrise, a color that matched DeWalt yellow. I painted the rest black. The goal was to make the stand match the saw's color scheme. I also put 2-inch casters on the bottom. This stand needs to be mobile. Next came the drawers. I was a little timid approaching this stage. I've never built drawers before, but thanks to a couple books from the library, a few articles on the internet, and a bunch of YouTube videos, I forged ahead. Originally, I considered going with 18-inch deep drawers, but opted for 16s instead. I'm glad I did, especially since using 16s allowed me to get by with using only 2 2x4 sheets of 1/2-inch plywood. How should I join the sides and fronts? Dovetails were out of the question. I didn't have the tools or talent. Plus, considering the drawer slides were heavy-duty, ball-bearing, full-extension slides, I really didn't need them. Instead, I opted for interlocking joints on the front and rabbets on the back. 1/2-inch plywood, I learned, is difficult to work with when forming joints. Still, everything turned out quite well. Knowing I was working on this project, my brother gave me a circa 1992 sanding station. With a few adjustments and a couple new sanding belts, it came in handy making those drawers come together. I'd have had a tough time making it work without that old sander. Come to find out, they still sell this model. Harbor Freight has a similar one for about $80. As a cute little trick, I decided to make the larger drawer look like 2 smaller ones. I ran old Black & Decker across the face of a drawer front using a 1/2-inch straight bit. Then I painted the joint to give it the appearance of 2. It turned out great. A big challenge was lining up the drawer fronts. That guy on YouTube who recommends using double-sided tape can keep right on doing so. However, I'm going to find another method as this one didn't work well for me. Basically, it came down to using clamps and scrap plywood to make symmetrical gaps up and down, left and right. Although it worked great in the end, it really tested my patience. With the drawers done and the frame complete, I flipped the piece upside down and screwed on the top. The final step was to mount the saw. Using 4 3.5-inch lag bolts, I fastened the saw in place and called it a wrap. Well, here it is. Doesn't it look fantastic? I have a little less than $100 in it, thanks in part to Menard's 11% rebates and a 15% off bag sale. I won't tell you how much time is wrapped up in this project. Again, I'm not a professional. Of course, I must mention that I could have done a few things differently, and no project is free of mistakes. I'll show you some in a moment. Meanwhile, I'm just going to enjoy my handiwork. Man, I'm going to hate getting that stand dirty. Okay, here are the mistakes as promised. Number 1. Did I say I used double-sided tape to hold drawer fronts in place? As mentioned before, it was a failure for me. I need to do more research next time. I wonder how Norm Abrams would do it. Number 2. When fastening drawer fronts, I drilled a hole right through the outside. Cut my finger, too. Good thing I had plenty of wood filler on hand. For the drawer, I mean. Number 3. Measure twice, cut once. I should have cut my drawers a pinch smaller as they were just a tad bit tight. Fortunately, they were square, so I ran them through the table saw, cutting off about 1/16 of an inch on either side. They're still snug, but at least they open and close smoothly. 4. Finally, that recycled top I'm so proud of warped like a skateboard ramp. I should have just bought brand new boards. Better yet, I could have laminated a couple of sheets of 3/4-inch plywood together and run a chamfered 1x2 around the perimeter. I may do that yet. Well, that's my story. I hope you enjoyed the video and maybe even learned a little. As they say on TV, time to find another project. So long, and thanks for watching.